Hey, Ernie here. Welcome to the Part-Time Tech Podcast. This is part 2 of our interview with Sahil Lavingia, the founder of Gumroad. If you haven't listened to part 1, make sure to check out the show notes or video description. In part 2, we talk a lot more about how equity works at Gumroad and how they're building a new product called Flexile. It's a tool to make it easier to hire and share equity with part-time employees, and it's what they use internally at Gumroad. And we end with a bit more about Sahil's personal story and background and how it led to all the crazy things that he's done. Check it out.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned compensation. So I want to go back to that equity piece. Talk about how, obviously people get an hourly rate. Talk about how equity is aware at the company and how you've built kind of that out within Gumroad.
Yeah, I think my biggest issue, like transitioning away from the venture back journey and into this sort of quote unquote bootstrapped way is I just felt like the founders just owned 100% of the companies, right? And so I just felt like the one of the best thing about venture is the fact that you have this distribution of wealth that happens. And I felt like in these bootstrapped outcomes, which were great in all these other kinds of ways, like two founders would make a bunch of money and then like all these other people would basically make nothing. And again, nothing wrong with that because that was the agreement. They were getting paid in cash really well, et cetera, et cetera. They probably got some bonus as part of the acquisition. But I really wanted to figure out, like, could I take that equity thing that I really loved and apply it to this other side. And the way that the sort of how we currently do it is we basically look at how much people have billed and we just give them a bonus in proportion to that number, right? So if they billed 100 grand in 2020, we would give them, 10% bonus in equity, basically anchored to the last public valuation. So in our case, $100 million. And that actually is going to go up. So I think in 2023, it's going to be plus 50%. So if you make 100 grand, you'll get 50 grand in equity. And there are some limits, like you have to bill at least 10 grand a year. It's pretty low. Like most people should qualify for that, et cetera.
Right.
But yeah, basically the idea is everyone should basically be able to do the math really easily, which is you get paid, let's say $100 an hour and then $50 on top of that in equity. And the reason I like the kind of plus, instead of saying you get paid $100 an hour, of which half is equity or something like that, is that it's still a bonus, right? Like at the end of the day, it's still kind of a lottery ticket. It's still, you're getting cash. You can use that cash to like pay rent, right? And this is like a different kind of thing.
So is that an option or what's the actual?
So yeah, the way the instrument is, it's just stock options. So it's just NSOs, I think, basically that you vest immediately. So they vest immediately, and you have 10 years to exercise them. And yeah,
so what
that's the instrument.
So what would be the, it sounds like you want to run Gumroad forever, but what would be like the most likely kind of exit path for that to become liquid for your employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. and a question people sometimes don't ask, they get the equity and they're like, cool. And they're like, I'm like, well, at some point.
Do you want to ask something else?
and this is kind of actually why I'm forcing it upon people. Is a lot of people, honestly, they're like, no, I'd rather just cash. And it's like, no, I want people to get equity, and it's a trade-off. Like it is kind of annoying to learn about these sorts of things, but I think it's really important. And yeah, basically the most likely path is I would love to figure out how to do dividends and distributions and sort of take the cap table and say, look, we have 7,700 investors, including our seed investors, Series A investors, the crowdfunding investors, a bunch of these contractors, former employees that all have stock in the company, et cetera. I want to issue, let's say, $1 million, to these people. How? How? Like it seems like a very simple thing. Are pretty good at moving money around, but no startups do this, right? And so I think that's it's my main conversation to have in 2023 with our law firm, and the goal is to productize this. So if we can figure this out, I would love to kind of go to other companies and say, hey, this is how we did it. We did this crowdfunding round. This is how we structured it. This is, probably some conversion event we're going to have to do and figure that out. And then this is how we, set up our broker dealer relationship or what have you to do these sorts of distributions. But it's super uncommon. I mean, basically no company has done it. It's still very early, but I think the macro environment may lead to this becoming much more of a sort of an option or a thing that companies start to do. And I think the way that I would love people to think about this over the next 10 years is to say, hey, instead of getting paid $100 an hour, I'm getting paid $50 an hour plus $5 a year indefinitely. right? So if I can get Gumroad to a place where there's a sort of consistent cash flow that people can see, it's on chain or whatever, right? And people can sort of in their dashboard say, oh, I have these many shares in Gumroad, and that entitles me to this, and I can, here's my balance, and I can withdraw it to my bank account or what have you. Like these are all very like I know we can build all the tech to do this.
Right.
I think the regulatory nature of it is going to be the complicated piece, but that's what I would love to do, is to be able to get to a place where, and the dream is that if we can convince more and more companies to adopt this sort of way and get everyone into a single platform in a way, you could say, hey, I'm going to do 18 months at Gumroad, then I'm going to go do 18 months at Basecamp, then I'm going to do 18 months at Flexile, then I'm going to do 18 months over here, and here.
Right.
Maybe at the same time, right? Maybe you do, 20 hours a week at Gumroad and 20 hours a week somewhere else. Who knows? And then you can go into your dashboard and you can see like, this year I made $45,000 contracting and $18,000 from dividends from these 8 companies that I've done work for in the past. And this is my taxes, right? Like when I see my taxes, it's like Gumroad, CEO salary. Then there's like selling a course on Gumroad, and there's like investing in startups and getting dividends and K1s and, stuff like that. Or some exit, or, but it's a portfolio,
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I talk to all of my friends, like that are kind of considered quote unquote successful, like very few of them are successful because of just some salary, right? They made some bet, and that's really paying off for them. And they don't even spend any time, really thinking about it. And so figuring out how can I build an ecosystem where like there's hundreds, thousands of people who are all, benefiting in this way. And the numbers won't be massive, right? Like it won't be like, oh, I'm getting $100,000 a year from Gumroad, right? But I think it could be super powerful to be like, wait, this means that like 40 years from now, I'll be earning, like this is indefinite, right? And when you start to do the math and like, because I just think it's super key for people to be able to think that long term.
Absolutely. And it kind of, just going back to the theme of bucking kind of the big boom and bust of like kind of VC funded, like this saying like, hey, if you actually get profits, like this can sustain you for a long time rather than like, I'm just playing lottery ticket after lottery ticket, which not everyone wants to do.
Exactly. Exactly. And Gumroad, like I think if we get to, let's say 5 million in profit, we're able to dividend it out. That's effectively, our last valuation is 100 million. So that's effectively like a 5% cash flow,
right?
Cash on cash return on your investment. And that's in a recession, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I think it could be a very appealing. And then, at some point, maybe there's a secondary market for this as well, right? So there's always that option, which is like the traditional option, or an IPO or what have you. But I do think that what I would love to do is, can we figure out how to do all of this stuff without IPOing, without selling the business? Because if we can, obviously Gumroad, has money comes in through Gumroad. We pay people via Flexile. Everyone's a contractor, so it's like very low sort of activation energy.
Sorry, to be clear, Flexile is what this platform that you guys are building.
Yeah, so like Flexile, yes, is the name of this platform that we're building for flexible work. And then, you get dividends. In theory, like I never have to sell the business. I never have to IPO. I can just say, well, like this is it. Like there's no plan. The plan is this. Like we make $5 million a year in profit and everyone has their allocation, and this is the last dividend, and we're shipping this stuff, and we think we can get to 6 million in profit next year. And like, that's, and maybe it'll go down, maybe like 100 years from now, it'll be zero again, right? It'll have some path, and who knows? But it'll live out whatever its life, and there'll be like kind of the area under the curve, like the integral of profit, and that, that'll be the business. And
it got distributed over time. So,
and then there's other things that we could talk about, like things that I think could make this model even more interesting. But yeah, I think thinking, like having people think about that, like I worked at Gumroad in 2011, 2013, 2018, 2024, and now it's 2026, 2020, 2030. And I have this thing that pays me just like, JK Rowling gets a check, every quarter or whatever. Like people should feel that for Gumroad, right? Like hundreds of people should get a check every quarter. For having that work for us.
So what other components are there to Flexile? So it sounds like you guys are using this already for Gumroad. So what does it take for you guys to release this on the market? Because before you like selfishly, I want this, right? I was actually talking to a friend who works at Carta, and I'm like, I guess I basically like reinvented profit sharing in my head. But what I want is like, hey, I got this little like passion project I'm doing right now. I'm trying to build part-time tech, but like I don't have any cash flow right now. I'm just trying to grow an audience. But I'm sure there are a lot of my friends who I could offer like future equity or like an upside in the future, or I could pay them a small amount of cash and give them that upside. And I think there are a lot more companies that could be built this way. So I've wanted this vehicle for myself. So yeah, I'd love to hear like how you guys using it and what do you guys need to actually release it as a product?
Yeah. So what we use it for is basically onboarding. So all the contracts, paperwork, signing, all that stuff happens within the product. And then onboarding, payments, collecting all that information, and then dealing with taxes, compliance, payments, all, in all the different countries and currencies. The only real thing that is left is we just need approval from Wise to like for volume, basically. Like the volume requirements are like basically, Gumroad does probably $300,000 a month in GMV, just our contractors. And so scaling up. So I think what we'll do is actually just basically white label it or not white label it, but allow people to basically give us their API keys and we'll just on the back end create accounts for them and it'll just use their Wise API keys in the beginning, show Wise that we're legit, and then hopefully they'll allow us to kind of scale up.
And for people who don't know what's Wise.
So Wise is basically it's the rails that most of these companies, Deal and Remote.com, and a lot of these folks use to do international wire transfers, basically. And the issue is just same thing with Gumroad, just spinning up a new platform that handles transactions. Everyone is just scared.
Yeah,
everyone is scared of risk and fraud and money laundering and terrorism and all these things that like there's all these boxes you have to kind of check, Yeah. And that's kind of partly why I'm doing it almost like as a Gumroad project, is I think it'll make that a little easier to say, hey, look, we've been around for 11 years. This is the volume we already have on the platform. This is just like a, kind of a new thing that we're doing. And then once we have that, we'll spin it out as a separate company. So is the plan.
Who do you think is your ideal customer for Flexile? Because, it sounds like it's not just software. It's sort of tied to this vision of what a company could look like. Obviously, it's your vision. It's what you want to do for Gumroad, and you want there to be more companies like it. So who are going to be your first customers, or do you have people testing it already?
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of people I have in mind. Like I really like, for example, the Every company, every.to. Like I think there's so many companies that are like, you don't need employees, like you can create a valuable product because you have writers, you have engineers, you have, people doing customer support, but you don't have staff in the sense that you don't have like a thing that you have to like show up and turn the lights on, And so I really think like any remote company that is, any organization of people that wants to build a software product and sell it in sort of some scalable way to an audience and isn't looking to raise money, isn't looking to IPO, but is looking to still onboard people, still deal with 1099s, like still be compliant. But I think it could actually be pretty broad in terms of like the kinds of folks that would use it. But I think it'll start out being like basically a remote only, basically Substacks and, sort of like content companies and small kind of like startups. And I also think like crypto potentially. I'm also really interested. This is like a pet idea of mine is I think there will be a new kind of company that will basically be model producing companies in AI, where you'll have a company that basically just gets data, collects the data, cleans the data, trains the model on the data, and then like sells an API to use the model or licenses the model, right? If you need a model that does some very specific thing. And I have a feeling that these companies, like you might provide a model that is like incredibly valuable. It's almost like your ACV is like $100,000 a year just to like use this model, right? But you have like, one data scientist, one engineer, two or three people in a lab somewhere, or a bunch of people you pay, contract to label data, but you don't have any full-time employees. So I think companies like that will be really good fits for Flexile. Definitely. I have a lot of friends who are, especially going into a recession, they're like, I don't know if I want to commit to like a company. Like just the idea of a company is such a big deal. And so I think anyone who's like wants to build stuff with other people, but doesn't want like the bundle of like starting a startup, raising venture capital, like all
being
of that.
Being
a manager, hiring people. And by the way, firing people sucks, right? So like layoffs suck. And so like, what if you didn't have to? What if everyone's a contractor and you're, yes, it is, it is a trade-off, but part of what I'm excited to do with Flexile is to show people like, this is how we have managed those trade-offs.
Yeah.
as a company. And I can show you our Notion docs and you can copy paste them, and you can we can do these webinars and say, hey, we're all going to hang out as, people who run these kinds of companies every month and talk about how we do this, because it is like, we're all just trying to figure it out, right?
Certainly.
Like it is not a certainty. And I think that's really critical. Like when I communicate to the team, it's like, we're still in, like, I would say pre-product market fit, or we should act like it, even though we feel like we have product market fit.
Right.
N
equals 1.
Exactly.
Yeah.
N equals 1. So, we need to do a little bit. It's not that hard to sell me on my own idea,
Sure.
Well,
right. I really like this because I love Flexile. And, when we spoke about it before, it really got me going because, there's a lot of businesses out there in the part-time-ish space. Agencies, placement, kind of two-sided market. There's the Upworks, the Fiverrs, kind of more gigs, and all great companies, like, certainly fill us niche, but they're not like innovating in the sense of like doing something totally different, which is why I think Flexile was so interesting when you first kind of told me about it.
And I think partly it's because, like, it's hard to innovate when a lot of the jobs they're doing are just, $5 for, a stock photo or a graphic designer, and these are all great, useful things. But one thing I'm really interested, and this is a risk, I think this will be an interesting thing to see, is we're building almost like a gig economy company, but for people who make $100 an hour, right? Like it's a kind of a different sort of type of person. But I think what it allows us to do, if we can pull it off, is take all of those amazing, talented people and say, well, what platform would you work for? Like one, I know equity wants to, is going to be core. Like, guess what? None of these other platforms like Upwork have equity built into it, and it probably never will. But like, what else is exciting to you? For example, project-based billing, bounties, split tasks. Like, you can split the work between two people. What if, like, to your point in Germany, like, what if I think you're one person, but you actually have a team of 7 people? You're like a 10x engineer, but actually you're a firm. And so you almost have like a nest of like Gumroad employs this company, but this company actually uses Flexile with, there's like a tree. And so there's all of this fun stuff that I think we could layer on if we can get everyone in the same place and using the same sort of like database, right? Like, there's things about, like, if you can have multiple companies, let's say your Gumroad contract is going to end in 3 months. You could even like say, like, check a box and you'll show up on the marketplace as like currently working an engineer at Gumroad, contract ends in 3 months. Right. And people can bid, like, say, hey, you should work at my company, like, next work for me, and like, I think there's all of this interesting, like, buyer seller, sort of marketplace dynamics that exist in engineering and software design and startups, but like, no one hasn't really, it's not visual, right? You can't see it, right? It just happens on LinkedIn and email, but it's never been put in one place. And nor will it all be put in one place. But if we can say, hey, for like this kind of specific kind of work of, you want to work remote, you want to work 20 to 35 hours a week, you want to do a contract, you want to earn equity, come here. And the assumption that everyone here, like, basically the core assumption we're breaking is that the company doesn't have a monopoly on the employee.
Right.
And so when you
they're
break
more free agents.
They're more free agents. And so they can go work somewhere else. They can go work 2 jobs at the same time. It's just a completely different kind of relationship. And I haven't said this online because I don't think it'll be received well. And I think there's going to be a lot of cultural changes.
We can edit it out if we need to.
But really what I want to communicate is, like, I just want everyone to be equals. Like, right now there's employers and employees. And like, and I don't think Gumroad is there yet, but I would love to feel like I am an equal to my engineers, in the sense that like Gumroad is freelancing for them and they're freelancing for Gumroad, in a sense. Like, this is a completely at will, it makes sense for both sides agreement. And Gumroad definitely has more power than so it's not equal in that way. But I like that idea that, like, for example, I, as the CEO of Gumroad, can like freelance for Gumroad, or I can go freelance for somebody. Like, there's nothing wrong with me doing that, right? Whereas currently it would be seen as like kind of weird, right? But it's like, no, this is just a thing that I happen to be the CEO of. And like, what if one of these folks wants to become, like, why not? Why can't they become an admin for Gumroad? And like, so I just think blurring the lines of like the employer and the employee, I think could be pretty interesting. And the sort of selfishness for me is like, well, can I get rid of myself? Right. Like, because that's the best thing. I still retain the equity. Right. So like, why wouldn't I want to sort of figure out how to get everyone to do my job for me? And then if they get paid to do that, awesome for them too, right?
I feel like there's some interesting kind of like almost game theory dynamics here. Cause, you know, I was kind of doing this thought experiment myself. It's like, hey, so the way we work today, full time, you do this song and dance of an interview. It's really time expensive for the person interviewing. It's really, as a company, you have to pay a recruiter, or you have in-house recruiting, which is extremely expensive. It takes a long time. And when a hire doesn't work out, it feels like you broke up, you know, with your girlfriend or boyfriend, right? You know, companies have to join Flexile. It sounds like they have to be okay with people leaving and coming and going. But the trade-off is that you accept that you're part of this greater pool of talent and that work is much more liquid. And in the end, that's a much better unit of people working than like a full-time block, which is a lot harder to kind of break apart.
Exactly. It would be like almost like going to college, right? Where you're in one class with some people and then it ends, and then you go to another class and they're like, oh, 3 of us are here too, you know?
Yeah.
We all supposed to go here next. And like, now we're all earning equity here and we're going to do this thing. And maybe we should all join the next thing together too. And maybe there's even like a way to have teams on Flexile that can kind of get bundled together. And yeah, I think it's really fascinating. And I think there's so many, like, I feel like better, like people know the kinds of decisions they should be making, the kind of the better, more rational business decisions. But because there's so much emotion, they don't make them, right? For example, it's like, I should let that person go, but I just can't, you know, we need them. There's no other person in the world that could do their job. And then like that you find someone else the next day that's better, right? Like once you do it, but it takes 3 months of you like finding excuses not to do it or something. And so for me, I'm always trying to figure out like, how do I get rid of the stakes, lower the stakes, lower the emotional energy,
right?
So that we can just make the right decision, right? And that might mean like, hey, it doesn't make sense for you to work at Gumroad anymore, but that means that you can go make double because you can now go get a job at Meta, you know, but you would have never applied for that job if you're comfortable, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the other thing is like, there's like a level of growth that I think this model you need that growth because Gumroad is kind of like only going to be there for 18 months for you or something like that, right? You can't sit at Twitter for 12 years, you know, and be comfortable. Like it is, and that's another kind of trade-off is like it is a little bit like everyone is a little bit more of an entrepreneur and a freelancer, right? What do freelancers do? Like you're kind of constantly looking for new work, like you're kind of an entrepreneur in that way, right?
But you're making that whole process easier for people rather than like shouting out
exactly. And like people are like, what are these people going to do? Like when they get laid off, I'm like, well, you'd hope that they operate with the idea that this is a possibility. So they probably have some bank balance. They probably have some savings. Yeah. You know, like, and if they don't, like, that's something I need to help people get educated about. Right. Like I should tell Gumroad folks that, hey, if you're making $200,000 a year in Thailand, you probably should put most of that in your bank account, you know, so that let's say next week, let's say Gumroad, for whatever reason, we're culling a bunch of contracts. You're like, cool. Instead of freaking out, right? Yeah. But if you're freaking out, then I probably did something wrong, you know? Right. But ultimately it's choice. That's the other thing too, is like, if that's the way you choose, like ultimately, you know, you're allowed to do that.
That's your individual choice.
You know? Yeah. So, and you're skilled. I mean, the other thing is these are all very skilled people.
Right.
So, you know, it's not like these like, you know, I was talking to a friend and she's like, well, they're all contractors. What about healthcare and benefits? And
that's the number one objection.
I'm like, well, one, you know, in the outside of the US, it's not really a problem. Like people kind of have it dealt with other ways. In the US, you have it through, like I have it through my spouse. Someone else has it through the state of Washington. Like people just figure it out. Maybe that's something we can offer, or we can help educate people around. Ultimately, I think it's something the government should probably do, but
at least in the case of Gumroad, you know, they're fairly well compensated employees.
Exactly. Yeah. Ultimately, I was like, you're right. We don't have those things, but we also pay people like $200 an hour. So like,
and they've also made the trade-off that the flexibility is more important than having more discounted healthcare through like a group plan.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think ultimately people are making a trade-off. They know what trade-off they're making. They're getting paid super well, and they're very smart people, right? Generally, the people in society that really need a lot of these help, they're not working at Gumroad, right? There are other things that have happened to them that have led them down this other path, and we should definitely help those sorts of people. But like, and that's the other thing is like, I think, you know, Gumroad is not for everyone, right? And like when I say that work is a small part of my life, what it allows me to do is it allows me to solve these other problems,
Right.
just to solve the other problems, right? Instead of saying, oh, Gumroad needs to solve everything, or I'm doing enough with Gumroad, so I shouldn't worry about this other stuff, right? Like, which I think sometimes is a tendency. Like, I know former self would have been like, if I do Gumroad, I don't, it's kind of the Steve Jobsian thing. It's like you build Apple and everyone gets a bunch rich off Apple, and then they can donate to charity if they want, right? Well, it's like, well, I'd rather do both. I think it's possible to kind of run Gumroad in an interesting way, do it, profitably, and then there's tons of other stuff I do that there's no profit. I'm never making any of the money back, but it makes me feel great, and I'm going to keep doing that. But combining them, I found just never works. You just kind of, it sort of doesn't work as well as you thought, and now you feel terrible, and then maybe you don't want to do it again.
Yeah,
I just say Gumroad's good at this. Let's use Gumroad for that. And same thing with relationships. Like I have relationships with people, and this is like what we talk about. And if we like talked about some other thing like politics, I would hate you, or whatever, right? Like, so you just have to. I think sometimes people think, oh, I have to like be best friends with everyone I work with, and like we have to, it's like no, like maybe we're just really good at working on this thing together,
Yeah. I want to get back to some of those kind of personal things you mentioned there, but I think just to wrap up kind of like the whole thing about Flexile is like, so some market research for you from what I've seen. I have a friend who, really good engineer, manager, and he's building his startup in this very like amorphous way. He just invited all of the best engineers he knew and his friends into this Slack channel. And he's just like building it and like telling them, giving them updates. And that's how he's slowly kind of building the startup. And then he got a contractor, like his friend to be a contractor, like 1 day a week. And then it's just building kind of slowly until he feels like he's got a bit of a fit. And then he'll raise like a little bit of money. So I feel like that kind of a thing fits much more the Flexile model, in addition to another Slack channel I'm a part of, a bunch of my friends who are like indie hackers and other things. And we're just like sharing ideas. We're spiffing off things. And it's like, hey, you want to come help me with this thing? Like, hey, one of them just got laid off. It's like, hey, you want to come help me for like a few hours, hours a week, or like for some of this revenue share, like until you find your next thing. And I feel like there's going to be a lot more of these situations now, given the macro economy, just things switching more to profits. And then of course, post pandemic, just the whole equation of how people want to work, I think has changed, as well as just the cultural shift of like, I need more balance in my life. So, I know you're product market fit, but I hope kind of selfishly the wins are correct for kind of where Flexile is
I think it'd be awesome. I think that there's such a great opportunity for all of these amazing, and our industry is just also super young.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, it's not even a cycle. It might just be the next stage of our growth as an industry, right? Where we're still growing and evolving, and
or even just the way corporations exist today is not existed for that long, right?
Totally. Yeah. And it clearly like isn't working for lots of people, right?
Definitely.
And like I'm a huge whatever, like I love the private free markets, whatever, but like I also think like, yeah, it sucks when there's all these jobs that people just feel like they clock in and clock out and don't have any creativity, and they just kind of like, take orders and leave, and like can be quite soul crushing. And they don't have equity in their companies. They don't have any real creative decision-making power. Like they have to commute and out. Like there's all of this stuff that sucks about it. So yeah, I don't know. I think I would love to see a world really just choice, right? Like just options. Like I don't think that this way of working will be the way everyone works, but if 5% of people can work this way, and it shows people, oh, you can be a software engineer and work this way, or you can do it the traditional way. Just like you can be a musician and you can work for like an ad agency and just be a staff, or you could be a musician, or you could be a producer. Like there's all these different options for creative people, right? And I think with software engineering, it's almost like earlier or younger than music in the sense that like maybe we haven't gotten to that point yet where we have like these kind of like amazing sound engineers who will live all over the world. And like, if you're like a musician, you just kind of like ping one of them when you're in town, and they help you with your thing. And like, like maybe we need, like I've thought about this where like, we kind of outsource all of our, servers to AWS or Azure or Azure or whatever, right? Like what if there's like 1,000 engineers who are freaking amazing at let's say certain things, and every company just uses the same 1,000 people, right? Like, we built our own user sign up flow and forgot password. It's like, what if there's people who are amazing at that. And obviously there are
Yeah.
gems and open source and all these other things that make it easier too. But I think there's that as well. It's like, if you're amazing at a certain skill, why don't you do that for 10 companies instead of one company, and then do all these other things that you're not as good at, but you have the job.
Yeah.
So you're like, and you like, I think about this, like friends of mine who are like amazing graphic designers. And it's like, that's a very kind of like, it's great for freelance, because you come in, you do a bunch of work, and then you kind of like take that work and just use, generate more work off of that original work. But like, there's the creativity there's a burst, right, at the beginning. Or logos, right? If you're a logo designer, you're probably not going to work full time for a company. You're going to go freelance and work, do logos every year for a company, a year or something. And so like, what if engineering is like that too, right? Where you're like, oh, you need a mobile app, right? And if you think about the people who I think are the best and are the most successful, they do work like this already, right? So it's really it's like the best logo designers do work like this. They just do it because they start a company and then they have an agency that does this, right? And so it's just kind of like, what if that model just applies to more people, and instead of like only the sort of people who are, super famous and successful, like Kanye West level, it's the software has made it so that anyone can do it, right? Just like, for example, like, I love Square, and I always use the example of like, Square basically took what Starbucks was always able to do, because they have lots of money and resources, and just gave it to everybody else, right? And so Flexile, I don't think is that novel. Like, for example, like anyone can hire Cooley to do consulting agreements and equity per hour. It just costs $100,000, and so we'll do it once, and then we'll, build it into the product, and then it's free basically, right, for everybody else. And just like your friend, like in the Slack group, et cetera, like it should be free. Like they should be able to sign up and set up all these rules, and only if and when it works, if and only if it works, then you commit, and you start paying, and you kind of keep going, right?
And I think there's just so many good small being relative, like, on the Gumroad scale of like several million in revenue, that do really well. And you could have a lot of equity in a bunch of those, and like your hit rate could be like greater than 25-50%. Whereas with a startup, you're like far fewer than 1%.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think, yeah, it's like, we would ask all these startups to like connect their Stripe accounts or whatever, right? And just, you should say, hey, like, I want to work at companies that are doing $1 million a year in revenue. And it's like, and use, Ruby as part of their stack, or Rails as part of their stack, or React. And it's like, oh, these are like 18 companies that are doing more than $1 million ARR, verified. Like, yeah, you're almost guaranteed, like it's not a lottery ticket at all, right?
For
like,
sure.
Like even when I did the crowdfunding round for Gumroad, it's like, yeah, I mean, we're profitable. We're doing 10 million in revenue. Like we're at that time 8.5. And yeah, I mean, like what's going to happen, right? Like how does this go to zero? So yeah,
it's closer to like Coca-Cola dividends than. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like when people are doing the math on all these other, on startups, like you're assuming 90% goes to zero. Right. But when you're filtering on startups, so for example, that are all post product market fit, like Flexile, I think will be either for like pre product market fit, like these super, super early, or, basically companies that are profitable and are looking to like figure out a sustainable way of working on in an ongoing way, and build equity into it and things like that, and then, yeah, it's a completely different equation where you could literally go from one company to another and effectively guarantee that sort of dividend structure. Right. Like you could go to, for example, a bunch of these, if you're a writer, you could write for a bunch of these media companies. Like I would hope to get and then get, 5 or 6 or, 10 other, like Morning Brew and a bunch of these other media companies on board. And then it's like, oh, cool. Now you have easy access to, these 6 or 7 companies. They're all trying to hire, So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm pretty excited about it. I think that the big thing for me, and like the lesson that I'm trying to remind myself of, is I don't want to get too visionary about it. Like it's fun to get, excited, and I do get excited. That's my nature. But I just like talking to customers and saying like what, like for example, just doing the Wise API key thing. Part of it is just like, I want it to be hacky. Like I want this to be a problem that people want solved badly enough that they're like, fine, I'll go sign up for Wise and give you my API keys, and help you build this thing. Because that to me is like the test of like, yeah, this needs to exist. People really want this sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I want to actually kind of change gears a little bit to kind of more the personal side. So, you mentioned, I think in like another podcast or maybe video, like, obviously you want Gumroad to be profitable instead of a unicorn. and it no longer felt like your quote magnum opus. You felt like you were stagnating, and like, Gumroad is not your entire life. So you turned to writing, drawing, hobbies. So I guess my question for you is like, why did you turn to non-business pursuits? Because most entrepreneurs, people who had the quote unquote success, and I don't mean that as a jab, but like, you raised a bunch of money from these big names. Like most people would just run that back. They'd be like, I'm just going to try that again and do the next thing. So why did you kind of opt out of that? I'd love to kind of dig into your brain and like, that's what most people would have done. So why are you different?
Yeah. I ask myself that a lot. Cause I mean, partly I felt like if I were doing it again, well, I would end up in the same place, right? Which is like, I did kind of succeed. And I think partly the blessing in disguise was like Gumroad was successful enough that I couldn't have easily done that, right? Like maybe if I had built some social mobile app that, wasn't making any money for anyone, I could just turn it off and build something new. But because like there's money like flowing through the system to creators, right? I was like, oh, I kind of have to stick with it to a degree. I also like, I've always, I don't know, like there's a part of me like that just says yes a lot, and like maybe it's high openness or something, but I just have a tendency to like, even though I don't know if it's the right thing, I just kind of am like, oh yeah, like I'll go along with that as long as I, again, like preserve optionality and can always get out. But I have a tendency to just kind of say yes, because you never know. Like, I feel like it's kind of like taking the different, walk to work or something, right? Like you never know what you're going to find, like some cool new coffee shop or some cool new mural or something like that. And so I've always just been super biased towards like, if I do this again, like what am I going to learn? Like not like I'll be better at it. I'll make a lot less mistakes. I'll probably hire a lot better, faster from my existing network, except building a new one from scratch, et cetera. Like certainly my odds of success would be higher. Raising money probably would do it easier at a higher valuation, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I just think my learning, like I wouldn't have learned anything, and to be honest, I would have spent basically 3 years just getting back, like just doing the things that I knew I needed to do. Like I know I can build a product. I know I can hire, like I know I can do all that stuff. Right. And so like, why do it again? Just for what? Just for the unicorn, just for the $1 billion. And like, I don't know. Maybe I have enough exposure to that to see that like what that gets you, right? Which is like not much more. Like it's not like, it's like, yeah, you have a nice house in the Mission or something, right? Yeah. But like you're still cranking, you're still working. We're kind of not that different, Yeah. So I think it was optimizing, I think, for learning quite a bit. And then I think more recently, honestly, it's become more strategic, which is like, because I got that blog post out of it and other things where I'm just like, now I just really over index on like, what's the thing that people are not doing, right? Because if you want to be the best, it's like way easier if you're doing something that just fewer people are doing, right? Like I just felt like, yeah, I could build a $10 billion company in Silicon Valley and no one would even care, right? Like even if you do succeed at the unicorn, it doesn't even like, who cares, right?
There's a lot of unicorns now.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, it was like, well, what can I do? Like, can I contribute something? And like reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company was like, I felt like I was adding something new. I was able to say something that hadn't been said before. Kind of like when you read a Paul Graham essay and you're like, damn, that was great. And like, that's almost more valuable than a startup because like, that's going to influence all of these other people who are building startups. Right. And so I think that probably gave me like a sense of like, oh, wow, my impact can be different, if I can like reframe it. Like I still run Gumroad, but like I can take all these learnings, share them with the world and actually like create more value for the world. And I don't capture it, right? And part of what I talk about in that essay is like the difference between creating value and capturing value. And like Gumroad created a lot of value, but failed to capture $1 billion worth of it. And that's fine. Like I think I was obsessed with, especially when you're super young and like, like maybe like feel like an outsider, you want to prove yourself, right? You want evidence that you're good, for yourself, for whoever. And in startups, that might be building a $1 billion company or having a certain number of employees or raising a certain amount of capital. And I think just if you can get that level of self-esteem, just without that, then you don't need those other things, right? And I think I got to a place of maturity and said, look, I built something, I did something difficult, I did something hard, and even if it went to zero, I still did something difficult. And
Right.
like building $1 billion, and I'm not saying I'm completely satisfied with myself and I have no self-esteem issues and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I'm pretty confident that $1 billion company is not going to solve them. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I think the work is inner work, and like it's not really like this weird social abstraction of $1 billion company is going to just, you know, plug that hole and it's like I'm complete. No, I can see it, and I kind of get a sense that I will probably want a $10 billion company, or I'll want a $100 billion company, or I'll try to, you know, become CEO of Twitter, or like something more sexy or interesting. Like I just think when you start playing that game, there's always someone ahead of you. There's always
It's hard to
that
get
next.
off the treadmill.
And so for me, I'm like, well, let me just find a new treadmill, right? Like let me go. I'm not saying I'm absolved of the treadmills,
Sure.
right? But maybe I can like learn how to draw really well, and like that can be a game and a treadmill, and you know,
Right.
and then I can like paint, or I can like write, or I can figure out this equity piece. And there are like these different treadmills, but I'm starting from like the bottom, you know, and it's different, and I'm having fun, and like it's not about making money. And I think that's the other thing for me is like I felt like when I look at what I've done, the things I'm most proud of, I frankly was not motivated by money, right?
Mhm.
And I do find that I'm more motivated by money now than I was before, because I don't know, I'm older, or I plan to have kids, or I don't know, or I have more money, so I'm now just measuring myself based on that or something.
Mhm.
But when I look at, you know, building the first prototype of Gumroad, or writing that blog post, or like the things that I've, you know, or have tweeted, or I did them because I felt like I needed to, right?
Mhm.
Like I felt like I was the right person to build this thing, and I was excited about it, and I had fun, and I wasn't trying to sell this or get customers or raise money. And I find that when I do try to do that, when I'm like, oh, I'm going to build an AI thing and make it profitable and sell it to things, like it often doesn't work. And then I feel bad. And I'm like, wait, am I worse at building stuff than I was when I was 18?
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's just like statistics, you know, there's
Right.
probabilities. And, you know, that's the other thing I think is really important is, you know, it's sort of the fooled by randomness thing, but like success is lucky, you know,
Mhm.
and failure is sort of is a statistical probability too. And so just never over index on anything, right?
Mhm.
Just like a career or a startup or an identity label, right? Like
Yeah.
I think you always want to make sure that you're like, you know, maximum 33% in one bucket sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And when you do that, then you know one of those things can have a bad year, and you still have two other things that are making you satisfied, right? Like you have a
Yeah.
family, or a hobby, or a sport, or some personal growth. But yeah, I think I don't think I'll ever get to a place where I'm like completely, you know, just like over indexed on one thing.
Yeah.
Personally, there are people who love it, you know, like it's like all they do, and they love it, and they, you know. But I just find that like I don't know, for me personally, like I just need more. I need more multidimensionality, and I always find that like the amount of stuff you learn from painting or drawing or anything that you can
Yeah.
apply back to startups or business or entrepreneurship, leadership, whatever, it's infinite, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's all the same stuff. Like you're kind of like, I feel like I'm learning the same thing in
Mhm.
just a different context, you know.
For sure. Well, Sal, this has been fantastic. I respect all that. I feel like you
Fun.
came to a lot of these things earlier than many other people would, and you know,
I always say, you know, it's like and I remind the team, like we're on the bleeding edge,
Mhm.
but you know, that means we bleed sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a reason that we're here and other people aren't here, and it's not because we're better or smarter. It's just because like we're more willing to bleed, you know.
Yeah.
Like we want this more, we're willing to try it, and then you know we'll get a little bit more credit, maybe, you know, because if we pull it off or whatever. But
Yeah. Definitely. Well, thank you again. You know, you're one of the foremost like doers in the part-time space, and I appreciate that you have very original kind of thoughts, and you know, I've learned from reading your posts, so I'm really grateful for that. So as we close, like anything you want to plug, or something you didn't kind of get to say.
yeah, I mean, if people are curious about Flexile, I know I didn't say too much about it directly because we're still working on it.
Yeah.
But we have a landing page up. So if you want to sign up, it's flexile.com, Flexile. It's an English word, means pliant. And yeah, hopefully we want to start onboarding people on the wait list in December is the goal. Right after Thanksgiving, we'll probably start.
My email's in there. Make sure it gets towards the top.
Yeah, it is.
So.
Awesome. Yeah, you'll definitely get one. Get an email from me soon.
Fantastic. Well, this has been awesome. Thanks, Sal.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.